Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our second ever Caramoor conversation. Today's subject is the Red Book, which is the title of a new piece by composer Paula Prestini, who is here with us today, but which is based on a Carl Jung book of the same name. And I'm going to let Paula really lead us in, but I just wanted to give our audience today a little history of how this piece came about, which is that our string quartet in residence at Caramoor this season, last season, the Talia Quartet, chose Paula as their commission, which Caramoor gives to each of its resident quartets. The piece was to have been premiered last summer. That performance was canceled due to the pandemic, unfortunately, but we're so thrilled that it's been rescheduled for April 11th, when it will happen here in Caramoor's music room and will be live streamed. So we thought it would be great to sort of let Paula give you some background on the piece in advance of its world premiere. And this recording will be up on our YouTube channel for the rest of the season. So you can tune in before, you can tune in again afterwards, and we hope that it will be informative. So with that, I want to introduce Paola Prestini, the composer. She's joining us from Brooklyn. She is also the artistic director of National Sawdust in Brooklyn, a wonderful venue. And Paola, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's a joy to be here. I've always wanted to have something premiered at Caramoor, so it's an honor. And today I'm really excited because I have with me the editor and the person who has actually brought this book to life. This book has been a book I've returned to since I saw an exhibition about it at the Venice Biennale in 2013, and I was incredibly inspired and moved by both the findings in the book, but these amazing drawings. And so when Kathy asked me to do a little talk on this, I thought, what if this incredible man would actually write me back? And what if he wanted to have a conversation? And it happened. So I'm really excited to introduce Sonu Shamdasani, who is the editor of the Red Book Liber Novus. He's here with us today, joining us from London. And I'm going to give just a little bit of a bio, and then we're going to dive into the correlation between the music and the drawings. He's going to give context. We're going to listen to some clips, and here we go. So Sonu Shamdasani is a London-based author, editor, and professor at the University College London. His research and writings focus on Carl Gustav Jung and cover the history of psychiatry and psychology from the mid-19th century to current times. He is professor in Jung history in the School of European Languages, Culture, and Society at University College London, and vice dean of the Arts and Humanities faculty. His research follows two interesting lines: reconstructing the formation of modern psychological disciplines and therapeutics from the mid-19th century onwards, and reconstructing the formation of the work of Jung based on primary archival materials. He is the editor of the Red Book. Hi, Sonu. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate very much, and it's an honor to have you. So I guess where I'd like to start is, you sent me something a few days ago that I found really amazing, which really talks about how to read the Red Book, which in fact isn't to read it from the beginning to the end, but to take kind of a cubist approach. And then I was further, kind of intrigued to learn that you were actually listening to music while you were editing this, and that you found inspiration in works from Ornette Coleman and so on. So can you tell me a little bit about how you came to editing the Red Book, a little bit about this idea of the Red Book as this kind of entryway, if you will, to understanding Jung, and in fact how you think of it as the most important over of his life. So if you could take us a little bit through editing it and the conception of it, that would be amazing.
Thank you. I started researching this in the mid-90s, and I found out through my researchers that Jung had copies transcribed by some of his close associates. I found 2 copies, and at that stage I had edited Jung's seminar on Kundalini Yoga, so I was in touch with the Jung estate, and I basically said, this is what I found, and they basically asked me, what is it like? Because no one living at that time had read it, which somewhat surprised me. And then began a conversation which took about 3 years concerning what to do with it, and then decided to release it for publication on the basis of the proposals that I presented. So that's how the project began many moons ago. And then there was another issue of bringing it to publication.
Talk a little bit about, you mentioned this kind of cubist perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean in terms of being able to experience the book, not front to back, if you will, but in different ways, and what that means?
Well, one of the best, you'd say, tips about how to read and study a book was said once by John Coltrane. He said, when you're listening to a piece of music, it's good to listen to it and just follow one instrument at one time. Listen to it again and follow another instrument, and then listen to the whole work as a whole. You're able to follow the main lines separately and then bring it all together. And in a way, I find that's a useful, or the best way of reading a work such as this. So I recommend to people when they're reading it, just try to start by just reading the fantasies. Try to follow in day by day exploration of the depths as it unfolds without foresight.
Mm-hmm.
And then after to read the second layer of lyrical elaboration commentary he adds when he comes to realize how pretentious the material is. And then only then to start looking at the images, because the images come later. They are, in a way, a level of reflection, another layer of commentary. And then, in a way, start again and put
So he actually did the drawings last, is that right?
Yeah, he started working on the calligraphic volume in 1915. And the first set of images are representational and illustrative of the text he's transcribing. And then they become what I call active imaginations in their own right. They don't follow the direct sequence of the text. They are another layer, a continuation of the chapter of the work, which in a way relate more to the fantasies of his Black Books, which has just come out a few months ago.
Amazing. Well, let's start with this concept of the mandala. I think we have it here in front of us. I guess I want to tell the audience that for me, this is a work that I'm very excited to write. You know, for composers, writing a string quartet is always very daunting because the repertoire is extraordinary. It's the first extra musical work that I've embarked on in a long time. I tend to write a lot of operatic work. And my favorite string quartet is Beethoven's Opus 131. So I knew that I thought it would be interesting to kind of take the cyclical approach of that quartet and relate it to this work, which in fact is in 7 movements. And I began with the idea of the mandala, and then took several other iconographic images like the serpent, the sun, the eye, from the book, and use those images and writings as different inspirations behind the 7 movements. But if we begin with the mandala, Sonu, can you tell us a little bit about the significance, if you will, of the mandala to Jung? I know it's a really important image in his work.
He starts to first draw these when he's on military service in the autumn of 1917, and he comes to view these as almost snapshots of his psyche, of his state of mind, and that he comes to realize that they represent the totality of the self. And that this is a representation of, let's say, of an integration and a resolution of conflict. That within the mandala is an expression of where this journey, this process of self-discovery, what he later calls in his conceptual language, the process of individuation, becoming whole, finds its pictorial representation.
So in the string quartet, the first movement that we'll hear actually begins with this idea of the ocean, and that the upper strings are creating this kind of oceanic feeling. And I know that the ocean also represented a state of mind for Jung. Can you talk about that a little bit?
He began these fantasies by imagining correlates to his emotional states, and then entering into the image, letting it develop, and to see where it leads. So there's a whole imaginal topography of, as you say, there are oceans, there are deserts, there are caves, there are imaginal landscapes that he finds himself in, and then explores. And in this work, there is, as he begins at indicating, a contrast between the spirit of the times, the contemporary world, and the spirit of the depths. And my sense in just listening to the samples which earlier today, which were really very striking and moving to me, that it's the motif of the depths was the one that you seem to be echoing in this first movement.
Yes, this idea of this, this kind of abstract world, if you will, where these punctuations, if you will, of the individual self, the beginning of individuation, begin to kind of emerge until we get into that second movement. Can we go to the second image? So this is the tree of life, if I'm correct. And this is the image that I chose to go with the second movement of the piece. I was struck by how Jung talks about the roots going down and the representation of evil, and then the branches going up to heaven, and this representation of good and evil, and how he balances and looks at those two things. Can you talk a little bit, and let me know if I've gotten it wrong, but it seems to me that this is kind of, this is where this image points to.
This is a later image, so it's painted, you could say, a number of years after the main text of Liber Novus. But as you're indicating, some of the motifs in there of the resolution of the conflict of opposites, an acceptance of good and evil, and an attempt to integrate them, and a notion that they are both an inescapable part of life, that one has to confront their coexistence and accept that as part of the fullness of existence. So the work in a way is constantly structured around opposites, and it's to find resolution.
And I guess I have a question for you, just in terms of, there's so much drawn from Eastern tradition in these drawings. How did he come to that knowledge? And it's pretty striking, all the parallels to Eastern myth and mythology.
In 1912, he publishes his book Transformations and Symbols of the Libido, and in researching that, he compiled an encyclopedic collection of works on comparative religion, folklore, and mythology. And he was looking for, you could say, commonalities of recurrent motifs, representing, in his view, typical movements of human energy. And that material, on the one level, he was studying the material in an attempt to analyze it psychologically, in scientific ways, he thought. But on the other hand, the material kept on working on him. So in a way, it was stimulating his own fantasy and moving him to, you could say, fantasize in a mythic manner.
Right.
And he began after that, again, to study, you could say, that forms of mythic fantasy within himself.
Incredible. So in this movement musically, when we listen to it in just a second, we begin with that introduction that I mentioned that has that water-like passage in the upper strings, and it represents the ocean, which Jung described as the collective unconscious, punctuated by these, brief, violent, arpeggiated figures going into the tree of life, which is infused with the idea of individuation and growth. And there's this pas de deux that happens between the violins and passages of virtuosic unity, and then those are balanced with these kind of single voices. So let's go on to the next image, which is the final. So I have to admit, this image just is incredibly striking to me. And there's the text that is inscribed underneath the painting is, "This is the holy castor of water. The kabiri grow out of the flowers which spring from the body of the dragon above the temple." So in this movement, I kind of, really just took it as a metaphor and created these droplets that expand throughout the movement and that have this very folksy quality, because the drawing inspired that in me. But I've always been curious to ask you, in this section of the text, what this means.
These images are stimulating. They stimulate the imagination. This text also stems from a later period and relates more to later figures in his fantasy, namely the figure of Atma Viktu, who in this form is that dragon that has been slain, and one sees the motif that you're picking up in your composition, the motif of regeneration, of new life appearing from apparent destruction.
Right. So it's interesting because that motif, it's so interesting to hear you say that actually, in the 7 movements, the picture that we're going to see next, which is one of my favorite, is the 4th movement, and it is the kind of underwater movement. And in that movement, so the underwater movement actually is of course the heart, the balanced heart of the quartet, and has the entire quartet singing and moving in microtonal and microtonal kind of slides. But that movement and that idea of regeneration that happens in the watering of the roses in the soul actually reappears towards the end of the quartet, and is in fact kind of spun out into a whirling dervish where the music is openly notated, and that idea of regeneration completes, if you will, the mandala. So it's just interesting to hear you say this. Maybe for those who are going to hear the quartet, hopefully on April 11th. And Sonu, I hope that you will tune in, but regardless, I'll send you the whole thing. Maybe just tell us a little bit about this image, which I know relates also to the idea of the sun god. But if you can tell us a little bit about this underwater image, that would be amazing.
This image occurs in a segment, a section of the text that illustrates the regeneration of the wounded bull hero, or bull god Izdubar, who is wounded by the science of Jung's eye when he realizes he can no longer find immortality. And in the section of the text, Jung tries to find healing from him, and first by literally putting him off this lamed god, and by reducing him to size and putting him in his pocket. And he then incubates in an egg and then is reborn, resplendent as the sun. And in this section, there's a sequence where a series of incantations which are chanted, so that there is, in that sense,
that's amazing
motif that to aid the regeneration of the god, you need to chant. You need incantation that is a form of a vigil that assists the rebirth of the god. And this is an image that picks up the motif of the night sea journey and the solar barge from Egyptian mythology.
when you mentioned, I'm sorry if I picked this up incorrectly, but that the sun god was actually put in the pocket. Is that what you said?
Yeah, this figure of Istubar, in a way, it's drawing together in a syncretic way different motifs.
Right.
And he comments on the text. It's like, in a way, this is how we, in a way, he is trying to, what can I do with this wounded giant? How am I going to find healing from him? How am I going to lift him?
Right.
Well, I can actually reduce him to size, because after all, he's a fantasy.
Right.
So this is paradoxically a way in which we kind of, by seemingly thinking we've got rid of our gods, killed all our idols, in a way we preserve them as fantasies, and they still have effect. They're still effective and are still presences in form.
So no, it's just incredible, because that sun god moment, I actually, I have read the text, and I try to return to the text and slowly understand it in the different ways that I can, and in different moments of my life. But what I took away from that was also this kind of caricature-like take on humanity. And so I reinterpreted that through this kind of passage of non-vibrato, I don't want to say comedic, but nearly, there's a hint of sarcasm in there. So it's just fascinating to hear you talk about that kind of, that redimensioning, if you will, of our gods. But I want to talk for a second about the idea of revision. In the book, you actually you do such a beautiful job of giving us, many notes, many sub notes to kind of help us understand the process of revision that Jung went through in his life. And in this quartet and in the making of it, I had a really beautiful process of revision with Talea. And I'd like to kind of make some connections there. Can you tell us a little bit about that process of revision and how you incorporated that into your vision of the book?
Well, the first moment, and first back to a question posed at the beginning, is the first task when I started working on it was finding a way into the text.
Right.
How do I enter into it? And I immediately stopped trying to understand it and just try to enter into it. And at that stage, I found I work with music in the foreground, it's fine, okay. I've listened to music to help me find a way into it. I remember in the early phases, I was listening at that point when I was working on it to a lot of Gurdjieff de Hartmann music. It seemed to take me to a kind of place with these sort of things. It seemed to put me in the right sort of mood, to shift my focus to this sort of scenography. And it was only when I felt and then I started translating it just as a way of getting into it, to inhabit Jung's eye, to put no distance between myself and his fantasies. The figures became as familiar to me as my own figures. But then after that, then it was, okay, when I felt, you could say, fully acquainted or acclimatized to this twilight zone, then it was a possibility of standing out, separating out, okay, and then moving out and then contextualizing it, and presenting footnotes and trying to situate. So in that sense of revision was a question of, you could say, moving in and out of the text and finding that I could never read it quickly. It always forced me to sit down and to take it slowly. And I'd always continue to find new things in it.
So it works on that abstract level that music does as well, which isn't surprising, because the book has this kind of multiple levels of entry, if you will, which I'm sure is part of the design.
Yes, it does. It's a multi-layered text, in the sense of, you've got the fantasy layer of these dramatic visual scenes with dramatic dialogues. You've then got the layer of what I call the second layer of poetic evocation and lyrical commentary. And this layer, to my mind, has got the most moving and striking language in Jung's corpus. And then you have the calligraphic version with
Right.
the illustrations, the ornamental borders, the serrated initials, and then the paintings. And then you've got this, you could say, circulation between image and text that both bounce off each other, and you could say create a further space
Right.
of energy.
It's interesting because another book that I was very caught by early in my career as a composer was from 1912, and it was a book of Kandinsky's of Woodcuts in Prose. I don't know if you've read
Beautiful
that book.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
have.
beautiful book.
Yeah.
And it operates, not in this depth of psychology, but it operates in a beautiful space of multidisciplinarity, which is a beautiful kind of place to spring off and reinterpret. So in this quartet, we were supposed to premiere the quartet last summer and then of course, the pandemic happened, and it was in a way a gift because it allowed me to go through a process of revision with the Talea Quartet, which has brought us to where we are now. And as composers, I think we love to live in the idea of process and to continue to revise, and it's only deadlines that help you give a work over. So specifically in the movement of the Watering of the Roses, I had wanted a certain technique, and it ended up something completely different. So I'm really grateful to the Talea for that exploration. But why don't we take a moment and listen to the introduction, the Tree of Life, and the Watering of the Roses. And I'd love if you're comfortable, just anything that you see in the music. Sonu, thank you for listening through those three movements. Part of me wishes that I had had the chance to talk to you 2 years ago when I began writing this quartet, but in a way, here we are. And I'd love any thoughts you had or any connections that you made while listening with your mind so firmly planted in the Red Book and Jung and all you've discovered.
Those are beautiful and strong compositions and performances. Just listening to them earlier today and now, first, reflection I had was I was thinking, okay, what's going on here? What relation does this have to the text? And I was reminded of an expression I found quite helpful in my own way of entering into the text. Was there was an expression that Duke Ellington used of a tone parallel in ways it's not derived from or an exact transposition of something, but a parallel in sound, like in his composition, such as tone parallel to Harlem. And that was how I heard these works. They weren't, you could say, a literal attempt to transpose or to set into music sequences or passages, which I don't know if it would be possible or what on earth would be a wise thing to do, even if it were. But it seemed to be picking up certain motifs and certain structures, such as with opening discordance and tension and resolution at certain levels, and then reiteration, in the sense that the resolutions are then broken down or separated, and then a harmonic sequence reappears, and there's to be then a certain shift to a resolution at a different level. And that type of opening of establishing a moment of tension and say, okay, what's going to happen now? And then to see movement as possible from a different direction.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, hopefully one returns to a work many times the way that you mentioned one needs to return to the Red Book many times. And when I began this, there was certainly a motivic connection that I made to different kind of symbols, if you will, that were in the book. You know, so this idea of a certain motivic, fragment that relates to the moon, or that relates to fire, or that relates to roots. But the idea being, of course, that upon many listens, one begins to be able to see the connections, between the first movement and the seventh movement, or these kind of abstract relationships that, that I hear in my mind, the ending with this kind of, the image, which we don't have here, but is of a man with their arms pointed up to the sky, and to me, it was this idea of like really taking in all these dreams. And so that's where I imagine this whirling dervish. But this is the beauty of abstraction, that somebody relates to it in completely different ways. So thank you for listening. And I guess my final question to you is, right now, in terms of where we are as a society and an international society, how have you and do you approach the Red Book in a different way? What does it mean to you right now in relation to where we are in the world?
When you asked that, I'm reminded of experience I had almost exactly a year ago, as we in the UK were plunged into this underworld of the lockdown, which was still perhaps in the purgatory kind of it. And I was giving a seminar in my course on madness, psychiatry, and it was my session on Jung, so I was covering some of the Red Book material, and it just really struck me as I was presenting it and rereading, going over the materials for that and speaking to our students, like the notion that he's articulating at that point, in a point where the world was in a similar apocalyptic moment. Right. It looked like, okay, the unprecedented, the Great War, as they called it, it seemed to be heralding the collapse of Western civilization. And the move that Jung made within that context of like saying, well, hold on a minute, when the world is bearing in on one, when we seem completely engulfed by what is taking place around one, completely assaulted from all sides, what the hell do we do? What can we do when we're completely at a loss? Just glued to the news. And the movie articulates as well, listen within. See what your fantasies are. In a way, listen to your own voices and find a space for that in connection. How do they respond to what is taking place outside?
Right.
And that, in a way, that to follow that as, you could say, some sort of Ariadne thread to lead one, if not out, but at least further along the labyrinth as a path to follow. And I think that's a productive thing to do.
It's a beautiful way to think about freedom design. I'm grateful for that ending thought, and it's just been a joy to be with you. I can't tell you how excited I was to meet you. So hopefully one day we'll meet in person. But thank you so much.
Yeah, I look forward to premiere.
Me too. Thank you
for this great talk. And just to remind everyone again, you can hear the complete Red Book on April 11th at 3 p.m. live streamed on Caramoor's website.
And you can buy the book, which is amazing.
And buy the book. And we will be having another Q&A after that performance. Paula will be with us again, and Natalia Quartet will be with us. And you can send in some questions to us during the Q&A on that occasion. And that stream will be available for 48 hours after that. So we hope to see everyone again. And I can't wait to hear the full piece, Paula. And
thank you
so much, both of you, for being with us today.